start? Okay. Hi. Good morning. I have a bunch of announcements that I'm going to try to remember. First, let me tell you, my name is Rebecca Hollenbach. I am obviously a member here. I'm also a marriage and family therapist, which is the most important part to remember, because the only thing I know how to teach you is therapy. So that's what we're going to do. Well, it all comes back to therapy, Kyle. It's all therapeutic. Okay, so we are doing the Stations of the Cross, which is not typically a Protestant habit, I would say, but we, walk through this process whether we know it or not. So we're just being a little more intentional during the Sunday school service. Last week we did, so it starts at kind of the whole Lenten story is what you talk through. We talk through it like really slowly. So last week we did Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus got betrayed by Judas and then got arrested. Also, so that's what we did last week. This week what we're going to be doing is the Sanhedrin. He gets denied, and then he's judged by Pilate, and we're going to do it real fast because I only have 45 minutes. And if you are on internet, I don't know where the camera is. If you're online, you can comment on Facebook, and Steph will tell me what you say. Anything else, my friend?
Go for it.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We also have images for each of the Stations of the Cross, and so we're going to talk through those as we kind of go through it. My understanding is at the end of it, all of these images will be somewhere so you can actually walk the stations yourself if you want to. I'm going to tell you the themes of what we're going to look at the beginning, and then I will probably say it 500 times as we go. So pay attention. What these three stories, what we're going to talk about through them is paying attention to who governs us. So is God governing us? Is it us governing us? Is it our peers? Is it the state? Who is it that governs us? Second, we're going to be looking at a transition from rigid transactions to relationship. Because the whole universe that existed there, all the culture, the church, everything was very transactional and rigid, and Jesus was like, nah, bro, that's not what we do. So he moved us towards a relational way of being, which we're still working on. Like, we're not good at that yet, but we're still working on it. Also, this one's a little bit contrived, but I needed a third point because you're not going to have a 2-point sermon. So basically, the stars that had to align for things to happen the way they were prophesied. So we will see as we go through this that there's all these things that kind of just look like coincidences that all just fell in line so that all the prophecies could be fulfilled through Jesus' death. And it's a little bit ridiculous. And it's one of my favorite qualities of God is how creative he is on just moving stuff around just to delight himself, pretty much. So we will see those things. First, though, so the first one we're going to look at is Jesus being condemned by the Sanhedrin, and my dear friend Jenna made us a picture of what that, her interpretation of it. So do you want to come up and tell us about it? Do we want to move the mic over? What do you want to do? Do you want me to turn this? I don't know. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to read the Bible verse?
I don't know if you have enough time for that volunteer.
Yeah. We are really good at knowing what's happening. Let me read the Bible verse first. You could just drift near me. Okay. It's not very long. Okay. So there, of course, these different stories are represented in the different Gospels. I am teaching, so I got to pick the one that I like the best. So we're going to be looking for the first, when he is condemned by the Sanhedrin, we're looking at Mark 14, 53 through 65. I'm reading from the English Standard Version. Okay, so Mark 14, 53 through 65. And they led Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes came together. And Peter had followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. and he was sitting with the guards and warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many bore false witnesses against him, but their testimony did not agree. And some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I'll build another, not made with hands.' Yet even about this testimony they did not agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst and said to Jesus, 'Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?' But he remained silent and made no answer. And the high priest asked him, 'Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?' And Jesus said, 'I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven.' And the high priest tore his garments and said, 'What further witness do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision?' And they all condemned him as deserving to death. And some began to spit on him and to cover his face and to strike him, saying to him, 'Prophesy.' And the birds received him with blows." I don't know why it's making that noise. Kyle, save me. Is it this thing? Oh, this Kyle can save me too. How about he fixes me? Will you do that thing?
You move it around to where your hands will not hit it.
There's not many areas where my arms aren't going to go. Okay. I warned him that I'm Italian, so I'm going to talk with my hands.
That's gonna be perfect.
Okay. Can you guys still hear
I
me?
think it is. Yes. That's doing it again. Okay. So, let's see. Okay.
We'll see what happens.
Let's see.
Okay.
All right. Can you hear me? Yes?
Now it's on.
It's on?
Yes, testing? Oh,
Oh,
here
there
we
we
go.
I'm not moving.
I'll try not to move. Okay, so this is all original photography that is in a collage format. And during my research, I discovered that most of the seats on the Sanhedrin, the governing council, were Sadducees. And overall, the Sadducees represented an aristocratic, wealthy, the elite.
I think you should turn off the headset mic, and I think you should pull it off and just use that mic every time.
Try again.
Yeah, just get rid of that one, and we'll just use the headset.
Okay.
Just the handheld mic.
The wealthy, traditionally the elite within the hierarchy, and so I chose to represent this very visually through the fabric. Very luxurious, it's lush, it's ornate. And so part of my color story that I chose was to use the very vibrant, luxurious fabrics. And interestingly, in Luke 16:19, Jesus gives us a startling clue saying the rich man was dressed in purple and fine linen, which is also representative potentially of how the Sadducees dressed. And another reference in Exodus 28, the priestly garments made with gold, with blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, with finely twisted linen. And so I chose to really be true to that color palette, using gold, blue, purple, and scarlet as my primary color palette. And in direct contrast to that color story, I chose to represent Jesus in the imagery in black and white. And I love the idea of the white and the purity for Jesus and truly his holiness. And black is is the sum of all colors, which I believe is apropos for Jesus as well. And so I chose to represent that as part of that color story. I also chose to keep the Sanhedrin in black and white, their faces, because what I believe is it still links their humanity to Jesus. And I wanted to connect them within the story, despite their the aristocracy and more about their behavior to come. The posture that I chose for Jesus is one of, I would say, humility. It's maybe head bent, almost kneeling, and in contrast to a very direct and confrontational gaze of the Sanhedrin. I like to think of it as they're very haughty. It's a very haughty stance. So the dichotomy between the humility of the posture of Jesus and the haughtiness of the Sanhedrin, I really appreciated. The imagery, I chose to represent the cloud reference, coming on the clouds of heaven in the scripture that we read. And interesting, I chose to photograph the fabric in sunlight because I can see different highlights and shadows, and I appreciate that it is sort of is illuminated by the clouds. I chose to photograph the fabric as opposed to actual fabric because I felt the piece was more cohesive once I sort of toyed between the two medium. Also of imagery, the temple reference, I will destroy this temple made with human hands. So at the base, there's sort of the fallen pieces of the temple in reference to this. And then I chose to place Christ on top of this structure almost as the holy temple to rise. Interestingly, once I finished my photo shoot for the Christ figure, there's a very faint cross on his back that was completely unintended, and I like to say divine intervention, that I recognized to my surprise after I printed the photo. And finally, the number significance. I've always appreciated the number significance within the Bible. I landed on 12 Sanhedrin, and I was thrilled that it worked that way because I think about the 12 disciples, the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 judges, and I appreciate the number significance throughout the Bible, and was thankful that I was able to represent that as well. So I really appreciated this opportunity for the Lenten journey and felt that I was completely a channel for God's message within this Lenten journey, and appreciate the opportunity.
I don't know what else I need to say about it. We didn't plan it. I haven't seen this, but it's a perfect representation of what we're going to talk about. So I was really struck as I read through this about the idea of just repeated false witness, which, fancy words, it means they lied about him, right? Someone stood up, they lied about what he did and what he said. And Jesus remaining silent in the middle of all that. So we don't have a ton of time, so think about this in your brain. If you want to answer, you can answer. But all of you, I threatened that you had to answer. Not at the moment, you don't have to. So have you ever been in a position where someone was bearing false witness against you? I have recently been in a situation where I was in an actual court of law. Someone was sitting across from me and lying about me. And it's the most powerless feeling. You're just sitting there, and no matter what you say, you look guilty, right? So if you stand up and you're like, no, that's not what happened, you look just as guilty as if you agree or say nothing. And so if you could think of a time in your own life when you were there, and what your immediate response is what?
Defend yourself.
Yes, your immediate response is to defend yourself, right? Why?
You're innocent.
Well, right, you're innocent. You want people to know. That's the key part, is because God knows you're innocent. He knew the whole time. He knows what happened. He knows who's lying. He knows what's up. But we're so, and again, I'm with you, I feel it. We're so driven by the need for humanity to know that I want them to know, I want me to know, I want my people to think about me accurately, right? I want people to like me, first of all, but I want them to know the truth about what happened. I don't think that's bad. I don't think that's a bad desire, but I think sometimes it can get us in a spot where we are not being, we're being ruled by that, right? Which is kind of that first thought, who's ruling us? Who's governing us? Jesus, his literal life was on the line. He knew it. He was sitting there. They were saying horrible things about him, and he stayed silent because to him, God knows. They already know. He knows what was coming. He was okay with it. He just stayed silent until he started turning it into a relational conversation. So they were pointing out facts, right? They're like, you said this thing, which all lies. But they were pointing to the facts and trying to nail him down on the facts of what he said or didn't say, and he made it relational. So he didn't deny any of that, but he turned to them and said, he talked to them about who he was. This is who I am. What are you going to do with that, basically? And so then they had to make a choice as to how to respond to that. So again, so there's your two main points, right? That one, Jesus maintained his governance of God. God was governing him the whole time. He was not governed by the Sanhedrin. They thought so, but they were wrong. He wasn't governed by his peers. He was governed by God. Also, he turned it relational. The last part, the Sanhedrin historically had the authority to send people to death. So they could. They were, for some reason, they were okay with stoning people. Like, murdering was fine. They couldn't crucify people because that cursed their soul. So they weren't, like, okay with crucifixion, which, I mean, I feel like that's a pretty fine line between the two. But, so the scripture, the prophecy says he's going to be crucified. He's going to be hung on a cross, right? So they just changed the rules, like, right before that. And so then the Sanhedrin no longer had the power to send him to death. So they had to pass it off, which is what we'll see in our third part. So just, again, keep that in mind, the weirdness that they just changed the rules all of a sudden. And they didn't know why they did it. Okay. So, our second picture.
Are you saying it's the Sanhedrin that cannot crucify?
Not anymore. So the Sanhedrin could never crucify. They could send people to death. So if this had happened, I'm making up the time. I don't know when it happened, but it happened shortly before. Say 50 years before that, if Jesus had gone to the Sanhedrin, they could have sent him to death, but they would have stoned him, which is not what the scripture says. And so in order for him to be crucified, he had to go to somewhere other than the Sanhedrin. Does that make sense?
Well, I think they had to do that because at the time Romans were controlling everything, so they had to get permission for the Romans.
Yes.
Now it looked like it was on the line.
Yep. So right. So he had to go to the Romans because they're like, we'll crucify whoever. We don't care. And so but it was the timing of it, right? Because we're talking the whole history of the world. It just so happened right after the Sanhedrin no longer had that ability to send him to death. Okay.
Hey, just so people know, what is the Sanhedrin? This representation of them being kind of ritzy and full of color, that's really, really good.
It is good.
But just tell us what the Sanhedrin even is.
Yeah, so the Sanhedrin, luckily I did my research, so I know the answer, Byron. The Sanhedrin is the governing body. They were part cultural, kind of, but they were part of the Jewish church. So they were the Jewish leaders, but to Jenna's point, they were also very, like, ritzy. They're one step above the Pharisees. So they had actual governing power stuff. The Pharisees were just a bunch of, like, middle-class religious snobs. But there's, like, a whole high council. They were, like, sort of the government, but sort of not. It was, like, kind of messy. Okay. Right? Okay. So, this one, Susan Weichert, I believe, did this. Okay, so we're moving to the denial of Christ by Peter. I'm going to read it, because that was a great idea, Jenna. That makes more sense. Okay. Now we're going to Matthew. Again, these are repeated in all the scriptures. We can give you all the references across them if you want them. I'm not going to read them for the sake of time.
They are on your purple sheet.
They're on your purple sheet. Convenient. Okay. So we're looking at Matthew 26, 69 through 75. Okay. And we're going to pay attention to this one, two things, right? One, who governs who? Why is he doing what he's doing? And the relational piece of it. Okay. Now, Jesus.
When you say it becomes relational, could you explain that further for me?
I would love to.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. So there's the relationship is the part that hurts. So the relationship of Peter to Jesus, Peter to his peers, how he relates to all the different people, that's what ends up hurting him at the end. Spoiler, he denies Jesus. But as opposed to the Sanhedrin and the Sadducees, they were very transactional. They cared what you ate. They cared what house you went into. They cared how you related to your animals on Sunday. Like, they cared about all these facts. So for them, you could have a whole list. If you checked all those boxes and were just mean to everybody, you were still really holy. So you could be an absolute jerk, but you didn't touch your donkey on a Sunday, and so then you were godly in their minds. Whereas Jesus upended that whole thing, and he said, it's about how you and I relate. And the donkey's a great one, right? If your donkey falls in a ditch on a Sunday, do you go save him? And Jesus was like, yeah, the donkey's in a ditch, go get him. Because it's about how you relate to the animal, how you are human, how you operate as a person, which is so much harder. It's way easier to follow a list of rules. it's much harder to just be a good person in relation to other people.
How is he relational to the Sanhedrin?
We can,
You mentioned that he was with them, so how was he when he didn't answer them?
yeah, so I don't have it, I can flip back to it. I don't want to get stuck there because we have a lot of time, but we will see it more in the last one. But basically, at the beginning, they were saying, like, a bunch of people lied about him, and they were saying, you said this, you said this, you said that, did you say those things? And he didn't answer any of them. And at the end, they said, did you say that you're the kingdom of man, or that you're a king? And he basically, not these words, but he basically said, you know who I am? Yes, that's who I am. That's me in relationship to others. I am their king. So he spoke to that relational piece. I'm the king of these people. It doesn't matter what I've said. It doesn't I'm not going to get bogged down in those facts that you're trying to nail me down to. The point is that I'm their king. If you want to kill me because I'm their king, have at it, basically. So he didn't deny his relationship to the people. Does that make sense? That piece of it is a lot clearer in our third scripture part. Will you ask me the same question if we get there? Okay. All right. Okay. So now Peter denies him. Again, it's not, the lying's bad. Don't lie, right? It's not great that he lied about Jesus. The bigger issue here, or the bigger sin, is the relational piece. He removed himself from friendship with Jesus. He broke that relationship. Okay, so Matthew 26:69. Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came up to him and said, you also were with Jesus the Galilean. But he denied it before them, saying, I don't know what you mean. And then he went out to the entrance. Another servant girl saw him and said to the bystanders, this man was with Jesus of Nazareth. And again he denied it with an oath. I don't know that man. And so I'm pointing out, he could have said, yes, I was with him, but I'm not friends with him. He could have said, yes, I walked alongside them. He could have stuck to the facts of what happened. He denied the relationship. And he said, I don't know him. So it's not exactly what they even asked. Okay. After a little while, the bystanders came up and said, Peter, you too are one of them, for your accent betrays you. And he began to invoke a curse upon himself and to swear, I do not know that man. And immediately the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, before the rooster crows, you'll deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. So here's our representation of it.
Can you lift that up a little bit?
Yes.
I'll hold it and you can read.
That would be great.
Thank you.
So Susan had sent, she couldn't be here today, but she sent me kind of her notes on what she was thinking. And I'm sure she will be okay with me scooting through them quickly. Before reading and this is Susan's words, before reading my inspiration for this painting, reflect on it and think about what you see. What she would like the viewer to notice is the light from heaven, illustrating God's love for us, shining through Jesus onto the shoulders of Peter, even though the rooster is crowing, and Peter has denied knowing him 3 times. The servant girl is pointing out that Peter was with Jesus. The faceless crowd is looking on as Peter realizes what he has done, as predicted by Jesus, and he's in great despair. The rooster is colored brilliantly, emphasizing Peter's betrayal. And there's a song that she had listened to while she was doing this, or that inspired it, and it's called Beautiful Messes by Hillary Scott. So maybe we can add that to the purple sheet next week so people can go back and look at it if they want to. So that was kind of her, she saw this as a beautiful mess, basically, as she was writing it. Thanks, Jenna. We have one more, don't go too far. Okay, so I'm going to ask an obvious question. Have you ever denied Christ? The answer is yes. Everyone has, because we're all sinners. We have all done stuff that is separating us from God, which is our version of denying Christ. We've done it a bajillion times. Some of us live with a rooster and have heard the rooster crow and it reminds you. Some of us can just imagine that. I am envious of the imaginers. So one thing, we've heard the scripture 100 times, right? Like we know the scripture inside and out. The one part that really struck me this time is in verse 74 when it says, he denied twice. It says, then he began to invoke a curse on himself. He cursed himself. How many times have we done that? So many times, right? And it's because the curse, what's the curse? Yeah.
Temptation. No?
Are you a ringer? Did someone pay you to be here? Because, right? Yeah, the curse is he was tempted, and that's why he denied him. The curse is that separation from God. That's the only curse there can be. There's no other curse out there. So he separated himself from God by denying it 3 times. And at the end, he's the one off by himself weeping bitterly. He's the only one, well, other people are impacted by his sin, but he's the one that feels it the most because he's separate from his God. And so that's why we see it here. I mean, I don't know how well you can see his face. He's devastated by what he's done. As a therapist, I want to spend all my time talking about why we do dumb stuff that hurts us, right? How much easier would it have been for him to just say, yeah, yep, I know that guy. He wouldn't have been weeping bitterly at the end. He wouldn't have cursed himself. He might have gotten beat up, but that's okay. But now all eternity, he will know that he was the one that denied Jesus 3 times. So, I have a lot of theories about why we do dumb stuff that hurts us, but I would love to hear your viewpoint.
My favorite story in the Bible is after Jesus' resurrection when he forgives Peter 3 times. And I always thought of it as a story of forgiveness, but now I think it's a story of relationship, reestablishing the relationship.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And that.
Well, hold on. Forgiveness is restoring relationship.
Right, but it's not transactional.
Well, that's in religion. We become so transactional. It's like I bring the goods of the things I think, say, and do, and you, God, bring the goods of the things you provide for me if I do that. Very transactional.
Yep.
It's all relational.
It's all relational, right? Exactly. And the part which I'm going to try and curtail this. The forgiveness is the coolest thing. First of all, talk about it forever. But the cool thing is that Peter didn't have to do anything. Jesus just literally showed up. He poofed into the room, right? And gave his forgiveness freely in a way that was very meaningful to Peter. Peter didn't ask for it. Peter didn't deserve it. Peter probably didn't even believe him. He probably got to the end of it. I'm sure Jesus felt connected and Peter felt guilty as all get out. That's okay. Forgiveness is messy. It is not quick. And it's not transactional. You don't check a box and be like, well, I have now been forgiven 3 times. We are great. It doesn't work that way. But it is, and that's the difference between transaction and relationship. Because relationship's real messy. It's a beautiful mess. Real messy. But you're right. First, also think about that. Jesus literally just died, went to wherever he went to for 3 days, rose from the dead, saving all of the universe. He cared about repairing his relationship with Peter.
Yeah.
Peter was on his mind. Peter is not special. Peter is one dude, just like all the rest of us. He cares about the same thing, right? Save the whole world, but he cares about repairing a relationship with Stephanie or with Rebecca. I'm gonna make myself cry. Okay. Last one. All right. Forgiveness is beautiful. Glad he did it. Don't lie about God. Okay. So he went to the Sanhedrin. They were like, oh, we abdicate. We can't really do this. I forgot to point this out. You know how beautiful those robes were? This was such a big deal, they ripped them at the end. He rent his clothing. He ripped them apart because he knew something was going on. So then they sent him to Pilate because Pilate was the Roman governor who could actually convict him to death, which we get there in a second. But, okay. So now we're going to John. I love my Gospels, and so I wanted to share evenly. So I didn't have 4, but I spread it out against 3 because I didn't want anyone to feel left out. Okay, so we're going to John 18, 28 to 40. I'm going to find it. Okay. So they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters. This is the transaction part, pay attention. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. So Pilate went outside to them and said, "What accusations do you bring against this man?" They answered him, "If this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourself and judge him by your own law." The Jews said to him, "It's not lawful for us to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken to show by what kind of death he was going to die. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or do others say it to you about me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from this world." And Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" And Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate asked him, "What is the truth?" After he said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him, but you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" They cried out again, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. And they released him. So this is her imagery of that. Susan Weichert still. Okay. And she said, okay, "In my illustration, Jesus stands almost expressionless while the crowd shouts to release Barabbas and crucify him. Pilate is clearly irritated that Jesus says nothing to defend himself. His wife, Pilate's wife, has warned him to have nothing to do with Jesus. Pilate believes Jesus to be innocent, but yields to the desire of the rioting crowd. However, he wants to take no responsibility for this judgment and makes a public display of washing his hands of the decision. The light of heaven shines upon Jesus while dark clouds hang over the gathering crowd." Okay, made it to the last one. How much time? What time am I done, Steph?
10:30.
Ow! Good. I'm done with this one forever. Okay. All right. Okay. So Jesus gets to Pilate. We talked about the things where Pilate goes out of his way to avoid this whole situation. He was like, "I don't want to, you guys do it." And they couldn't, for whatever, got to him. I want to point out, so they leave Caiaphas, they go over to the governor's headquarters. They didn't go inside so they wouldn't be defiled. Do we know why that is?
Yeah, of course, well, it's the different cultures, they were pagans, the Romans.
Yep.
Not only were the pagans, the food, and whatever else.
Yep. Yeah, so it was a Roman house. It was a Gentile, which is non-Jew. So it was a Gentile building. They could go into a Gentile building during Passover, but they had to have an open ceiling. So they could go into a courtyard with like an open roof so that they wouldn't be defiled. So that they could, and if they were defiled, they couldn't have Passover dinner, right? So think about how transactional that is. Do we think God is sitting there and he's like, "Oh, your head was slightly under a roof, so now you are condemned to death and can't have Passover"? Like, that's absurd, right? We think that.
Well, that's what Jesus says. It ain't what you put in your mouth that defiles you, it's what come out your mouth that
Yep.
defiles you.
Yes, because it's relational. What comes out of your mouth is relational.
Yes.
Yes. And so think about that. They were fine murdering innocent people. Totally fine. That's fine. That doesn't defile you. Because Pilate said, "I find no guilt in this man." And they're like, "Cool, let's murder him." That's fine. That doesn't defile you. Being inside a structure where your head is slightly covered and you didn't quite make it to the courtyard, that's the problem, right? And so this is that rigid transactional piece of it. That's obviously not relational at all. The relationship is what matters. The relationship is what curses you or forgives you or brings life. It's not the rigid transactions of the Sanhedrin and the Jews at the time. Do we have anything, Steph, on? Oh, you looked thoughtful. Okay. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. Jesus upended that whole thing. He was like, I don't care what house you were standing in. I don't care what goes in your mouth. I swear to you, I don't care. Because the relationship is the part that matters. Are we with me? I need somebody to nod, Cena. Okay, thank you.
Amen.
And amen's even better. I would have gone with a nod. Okay. So Pilate at this point is the ultimate authority. So I'm going to say things, check me if I'm wrong. I could be wrong, but I'm going to say things that feel right to me. So I think it was prophesied that he was murdered by the Jews, like his own people. And so that's why Pilate couldn't be the one that made the decision. Does that seem right?
No, I think he knew he was up against a major political problem. And
Right,
so
no,
that's
well,
why he washed his hands of it.
Yes, that part's true too. Well, there's a whole political piece to it. Also, relational, because he had to live with his wife, right? And do not underestimate that. His wife told him, don't mess with Jesus, because she had her own stuff going on. He had to go home and live with her. So that's a big piece of it. There's also a lot of political pieces of it. Pilate finally was like, I can't, I don't know, but you guys tell me what to do, right? He abdicated his responsibility. Which, again, speaking of the relational piece, which one was more aligned with God? Pilate, who's the Roman, who, not a Gentile, Roman, has the authority over all the things, and he doesn't condemn Jesus to death because he can't find fault in him, or the Jews themselves who condemned him to death, who cut off the whole relationship altogether, right? Speaking of denying Jesus, they were like, let's not just deny him, let's murder the dude.
I just want to clarify that. So the Pharisees of the time, they were the tribe of Levi. Jesus was from the tribe of Judah. Today, the tribe still carries on to this day. The tribe of Levi is more known for their voodoo and witch magic. And God, even to this day, has a grudge against them. And there's still a conflict between Levi and the Jews, or Judah.
So, I don't know if you could hear it on internet or actually in here. So we were saying the different tribes there was the tribe of the Levites and the Judeans? The tribe of Judah, yeah. That one now, which I don't know that if this is true, but one of our congregants was saying that the Levites currently are more known for their voodoo. I think that, I don't know, but I think that the important piece of it is because Jesus came, he made it a personal relationship anyway. So it doesn't matter what tribe you're from anymore, right? That now it's about how you relate to God as an individual human, which is why he said there's no Jew, there's no Gentile, there's no whoever. You get to be you. And you get to relate to him. You don't have to abide by the laws of your tribe. Some people still do, right? I mean, we all of us still choose to do dumb stuff that separates us from God, but we are fundamentally responsible for it, and that's where that repair of the relationship comes in.
Real quick, I think they did it in all ways. They thought they were following God. But you know what I'm saying? But they thought Jesus was the Messiah would come back like the King David.
Yep.
Like a warrior, like a Julius Caesar's son. They didn't know he was coming like Jesus.
Yes.
And they,
So, good point. So they, to summarize, they thought they were following God. They thought they were doing what they were supposed to do because they thought their Messiah would come back on like King David and be like this big dude that like took over the world and be very militant, because that's what they were taught to believe, right? I think the important part, which I don't want to go down, I'm a Presbyterian down in my soul. I could talk about predestination forever. We don't want to do that because we only have so much time. But some of them choose to believe. Some of them saw Jesus and they're like, yep, that's it. Forget this stuff. That's it. That's it. Because that's the relational transition, right? I was given, at that time, they were given a set of laws, and they're like, I could check all these boxes and be good. That's all I need to do. I could be a total jerk, be really mean to everybody, but I did the things. I checked the boxes. I'm a Sadducee, right? I'm not only rich, but I'm righteous. Jesus showed up and he was like, doesn't matter. None of that matters. None of those rules matter. None of the laws matter. I mean, they matter. But that's not the most important thing. Relationship trumps that. And we see that towards the end. I don't love the crucifixion, but I love that even during the crucifixion, literally hanging there, the guy's dying, it's relational. He looks down and talks to individual people. he looks at his friend and he says, like, take care of my mom, please. Can you do that? He talks, yes.
No, after you're done.
Oh, okay. I'm not entirely sure where the sentence is going to end. So, but even in the middle of it, he's inherently relational because he's inherently love, right? That's his whole existence. And so he could just lay there and die, or hang there and die, right? He could defend himself the whole time and say, like, your facts are wrong. You're hanging an innocent man. Let me tell you why. He doesn't do any of that because that stuff doesn't matter. It matters that he's right with God and that he's right with people. And so that's what he was doing when he was hanging there. Yes. Oh, that sentence ended in a really good spot, so I'm glad I kept going.
I was just going to say, not sure how to put this exactly, but Jesus was, a guy named Thomas Torrance wrote this book about this, which I really love, that Jesus was the quintessential Jew as the one who's coming to say, no, go to the temple, present yourself after the healing. Go listen to the leaders and listen to the law, fulfill the law. He was the quintessential Jew as he's calling them back to a relational understanding of themselves. But unfortunately, they're in a context with the Roman Empire there, where with Herod, who is not a good guy, supposedly their leader, and their relationships seem to have woodened up and gotten so so
rigid.
That during that time, there was such a rigidity that Jesus wasn't saying the law wasn't important. Jesus was saying your application of it is inhumane and wrong.
Yes.
And it's not squaring with love. So he says, you've heard it said, but I say. Well, a lot of the sayings he says, you have heard it said, eye for an eye, he interprets it. Okay?
Yeah. Well, no, you're absolutely right. And that's
Some
why I
of them are
caught
sayings.
myself.
Some of them are sayings. He's going in the Sermon on the Mount, he's saying, you've heard it said. Some of those are actual texts, scriptures. But some of them are just the sayings of what they're saying at the day. So Jesus is a quintessential Jew and is fully and totally Jewish as he's dying. And so he's actually reforming and calling his people to Abraham's call that through them all the nations of the world.
Yes. Guys, this is so cool. So cool. So I texted Stephanie yesterday and I was like, hey, guess what? The Bible's fascinating. And she's like, yeah. But so what Kyle was saying, for those online, basically that the laws weren't bad. Jesus followed the laws. He pointed people back to the law. He referred often to what was both written and what was culturally the law as part of their culture. He fulfilled those. He was into them. But he reformed them and turned them on their head. I would suggest that he didn't turn them on the head. He pointed it back to what their intention was. Yes. So when I went to seminary to be a marriage and family therapist, which is a very weird combination. But my Old Testament professor kept saying the Old Testament, Jesus' whole point is to point to the Old Testament because that's God. And my New Testament professor said the whole Old Testament is to point towards the New Testament because that's God. And the truth is they're all God. It's all God everywhere, right? And so the laws were set up to protect the relationship.
Yes.
That's why they were set up. They are not bad. The laws weren't bad. The laws were fantastic. They needed them. We need them to protect our relationship and teach us how to be in relationship to others.
Yes.
The problem comes in when the laws are the most important thing. They aren't the most important thing. The relationship's the most important thing. The laws are what teaches us how to do it.
Good
And so,
well put.
do you like that? And so that's where Jesus, even in his death, everything he did, he both defied, he reformed the law or shed new light on the law or reframed the law and fulfilled the law. He did all the things because one, he's cool. He could do that. But he put a twist on the law where to remind people why it's there. And laws are, I want to say they're kind of like training wheels, sort of. I don't know. They're like crutches or training wheels or whatever. They teach you how to do the thing. They aren't the thing, right? They teach you how to love others. They teach you how to be in relationship. They provide structure to make it easier to know how to do it. That's not the point. The point is the relationship.
Well, I got follow them laws, you have no relationship with him. You get what I'm saying?
Yep.
You're gonna stay separated from this guy, and that's how it is, you know. It's
Yeah.
It's like, you know, people could just never do right. You get what I'm saying? God loves us. He kept giving us chances and chances, and that's why Jesus came down. So you remember the lady that committed adultery. So what did Jesus say to the guys? All right, if you never sinned, throw the first stone.
Right.
It's a new covenant. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because we can just never do right as human beings. You know?
Yes. And so you're right. So if you break all the laws, you can't be in good relationship. Agree completely. In my world, I'm a marriage therapist, right? So I live in marriages all the time. And so in my world, I hear, I'm not going to gender it. It tends to skew in a gendered way. But I hear some people say, I love my spouse. I just also cheat on them a whole bunch all the time. But they know I love them. And it's like, okay, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, you can't break all the rules and still have as strong of a relationship as you think you do, right? If you're breaking the rules, something's off on the relationship. But the opposite is not true. I've also have partners who say, their partner will say, like, he's so mean to me all the time. He's like, yeah, but I never cheated on her. Okay, not breaking the rules doesn't make you a good person necessarily. Just because you meet, again, just because you check all the boxes, I never cheated on my wife, I always paid the bills, I don't know what the other rules are in marriage, I didn't divorce her, whatever. You could check all those boxes, that doesn't make you in good relationship. So the law doesn't fulfill anything, the relationship is what does it. The laws are there to protect the relationship.
One example of this is when we take the 10 Commandments and we stick it up behind a judge's desk.
Yeah.
And we don't put the preliminary words of it, which says, I am the God who brought you out of Egypt.
Right.
So that's the relational piece. And we just want to take those out of that.
Yes.
And place them on a wall, which could be a good idea to do that. But you're losing the whole narrative of redemption when you do that.
Right. So anytime you remove the law from a relationship, it becomes very brittle and rigid.
Try keeping the 10 Commandments on your own.
Right.
You can.
Right. Well, right, because we're humans. And so that's where, thank God, we have forgiveness and grace and kindness, because we all break the laws all the time. We break the rules. We're all jerks in our own way, right? All of us, all the time, because of our humanity. That's where the forgiveness comes in. That's where Jesus shows up out of nowhere. It's not like we deserve it. We didn't do anything. Jesus shows up and he's like, hey, I'm ready to forgive you again. Are you in? You want this some more? Like, I'll do it tomorrow too. I'll do it forever. Don't care. I already did it. So you're more than welcome to join me in this because I already forgave you. So here we go. We are the ones that it takes us a second because we're not the brightest. But, okay, so the end. Here's all,
I just had a question. I wanted to sort of focus back when Kyle said that Jesus was the quintessential Jew.
Yeah.
So I guess when we tell this story, when we talk about it, it may not be helpful to say the Jews did this or that, but the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees and it's the Jewish leaders that aligned themselves against Jesus.
well,
So we don't want to make the story sound entirely like Jesus was anti-Jewish. He came into conflict with the religious establishment of the day, the political powers.
I would not say Jesus was anti-Jewish. I would say the world was anti-Jesus. And it wasn't just the Jews. But if you remember at the very end, who was it that agreed to crucify him? It wasn't the Sanhedrin, it wasn't Pilate, it was the people. The people are the ones that decided to murder Jesus. Also, I'm sure it wasn't just Jews standing there. There was Gentiles there. It was the world, right? The world was anti-Jesus because he was not of this world, which is what he
But
said.
these particular texts it's true enough, what you say is really true. But the text is telling us something about the religious establishment
Yes.
of the day.
Yeah.
And so as we enter this sort of Lenten journey, I guess I just wonder, part of the takeaway is, are we ever going to get in trouble with the powers that be?
Yes, we will, because we are not of this world.
Well, then we need to be prepared for that.
Buckle up.
I agree with what he said. I find the separation of, because they're even though they're the tribe of Israel, there's 12 of them, but they're different sectors.
Yep.
And Jesus was mainly criticized by the
think you're both saying the same thing. There was a lot of different separations happening at the time. There was the Sanhedrin, there was the Roman government, there was the tribes, there was Gentiles, there was Jews. There was a whole bunch of separations, kind of across the board, right? All the people. We have to wrap it up just because of time. So, thank you for going on my relational journey of this class.
Can I make a couple announcements?
Oh, is there more?
I'm going to steal the mic and make just a couple of announcements. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Next week, we are going to be continuing on this journey with Jesus towards the cross, and Emily Cope will be leading us, and we'll be looking at the episodes Jesus is scourged and crowned with thorns, Jesus bears the cross, and Jesus is helped by Simon of Cyrene to carry the cross. And we will have more original artwork. If anyone is feeling inspired to let your creativity flow, we still have 3 of these episodes that we are looking for folks to portray in art. It can be any medium, any style, any skill level, but if you think you might want to do one of those, come see me because we're looking for 3 more people. And as Rebecca mentioned, we are going to have an opportunity at the culmination of this series during Holy Week to have all of these portrayals of each of the 14 stations set up. And we'll have some prayer guides and an opportunity to walk through and see all 14 of them together. So something to look